brief as possible. You know, this would take me a class or two to discuss normally, and y'all aren't going to sit through that long of a video. So I'm going to, again, work on my brevity here and see if I can't squish it down. So I'm going to try to do as little of retelling the plot as possible. Edith Wharton, who wrote the other two, is also wrote The House of Mirth, the novel, very famous novel, and Ethan Frome, which is another very famous novel. Was very, very successful in her life, generally writing about upper class people and that kind of stuff. Now, one of the things that I will do here is constantly get the three men's names confused. And rather than start recording over every time, we're just gonna bear through it. So bear with me on this one. But the basis of this story really is based on, you know, one of the first stories that actually dealt with divorce. Because at this time, you know, I was doing a little research, and New York was one of the few states when this was written that divorce was actually legal and was becoming widespread. In fact, it wasn't until 2010 that the state of New York actually had a no-fault divorce. So when this was written, to get a divorce, you had to prove, you know, infidelity or abuse or something else to actually be divorced, and that plays a major role in this as we move through. One of the things I want to discuss is the point of view from which it's told. It's third person, meaning the narrator is not a character in the story. But it's interesting because it seems to, even though Edith Wharton was a woman, she seems to tell the story from Waithorn's perspective, the husband's perspective, not the wife. So we really don't get any insight on what she's thinking. And I think that that's interesting as far as that goes. Now, said I wasn't going to go over plot, and I have that on my list I'm looking at here. You know, basically the point is, though, the wife has been married 3 times in the question, and that's probably why we don't get to see her inner thoughts, is because we would know what she's thinking. And, you know, one of the questions we have to ask, is she a gold digger? She seems to be working her way up with each thing. And you know, divorce in higher class society, especially at this time, would destroy you socially. But they're willing to accept it with her. Again, first with Haskett, the assumption there is that he was a brute. They don't know who he is, so they're willing to assume that he was, you know, horrible. And again, women couldn't just get divorced. You had to show some sort of reason, and we never really know what the reason is, but we do know that he's not what we expected. You know, he's sort of meek. He gave up his relatively decent job to move closer to her so he could be near his child, who's sick with typhoid when the story starts. And so, you know, he's not a bad guy. Varick, when she was married to Varick, who was upper class but not as rich as Waithorn, again, they said, we're going to accept this divorce because he's not the marrying type. Again, the implication there is that he's sort of a ladies' man and probably cheated on her and that kind of stuff. So there are those issues. Now, you know, we're dealing with two major things I want to follow through this story that I think are really important, and one of which is Waithorn having to deal with all of this, that internal monologue. But what you find is that every time he is forced with a situation, he really kind of thinks about it rationally. Again, you know, he catches her. She lies and says she doesn't see Haskett the first time he comes, and we find out later that she did, but after that point, she didn't see him anymore. He wants to get angry about that, but he can't. He wants to get angry that Haskett's going to come into his home, but he realizes there's really no other option there. When they're socializing and she's talking to Varick, her second husband, he gets angry at that, and of course she says, "I won't do it again if you don't want me to, but you know, what other options do I have? Am I supposed to ignore him at events? Are we supposed to not come?" You know, and he realizes, again, that she's being rational, and that's part of the problem with her, is that she's too malleable and too rational. You know, and then he says at one point, or thinks at one point, that she, you know, maybe being married to one wife who's good at it but sharing her with 2 other husbands is better than a wife that isn't good at being married. And he's sort of thinking about that, but he finds that she's too malleable. Now, again, there are a couple of very, very sort of sexually, and again, Wharton was known for this in her humor, clearly sexually related symbols, we'll say. One of which is she's like an old shoe that's too malleable because it's had too many feet in it. So again, that's directly a reference to the fact, at this point in time, someone of upper class society, when you would get married, the woman would be a virgin, and of course we know she's been married twice before, so she's not. And so again, that shoe reference is clearly a reference to her lady parts. So there's that. The other, so he's dealing with that. The other thing, I think a big aspect of the story is, to me, it's comedy. It's humor, and Wharton's known for that. And if you think about it, it's not slapstick, it's not joke kind of comedy. It's just sort of these comedy of errors. Everywhere Waythorn goes, he has to deal. He gets home from his honeymoon and he discovers that Haskett is going to come over because the kid's sick and can't leave the house, and he has no choice but to allow him to do that. Then the next morning he finds out that from Varick that his boss is ill, and he didn't even know, or know that, or his partner, he didn't even know that he was ill, and he had to be told by his wife's ex-husband. Then it turns out that he's got to take over his account as part of business, so there's that aspect. So that makes everything sort of come together, and he's constantly, everywhere he turns around, he's being faced again by one of these men. And again, that goes back to Edith Wharton's whole idea of divorce here and having to deal with that. And I think that's something that we can definitely relate to today, but something that was written about before. We have a lot of baby moms out there and divorces and kids from divorce, and you realize once you're married to that person, if you marry a woman with kids or a man with children, you're going to have to deal with the other parent at some point, and they become a major part of your life. My mother had been married before, and my sister's my half-sister, and oddly, my dad and her ex-husband were good friends and actually living together when they met. When my dad said, "Why'd you leave her?" and they could I ask her out? And her ex-husband said, sure. And they ended up getting married. So again, I grew up in a weird situation like that. And, where my dad has to accept that his friend was married to his now wife. And, my parents are still together, and we still see, in fact, her ex-husband built our house. So interesting sort of situation, but it's something that a lot of people deal with today. But really, Edith Wharton was one of the very first people to address this situation. The ending of the story, I think, is really interesting and kind of hilarious if you think about it. The cigar lighting, okay? In literature and in art and in other areas, statues, that kind of thing, anything that is longer than it is wide can often be seen as a phallic symbol. And again, phallus, penis, is a sign of masculinity, okay? Sometimes it could be a penis, sometimes it could just be male. Again, think of the Washington Monument, the father of our country, and we have this long, monument to him that doesn't look like a penis, right? But it's definitely a sign of masculinity, okay? And so Freud is very famous for a quote where he said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, meaning it doesn't always have to symbolize, it does not always have to be a phallic symbol, but a cigar, we could go back to the Bill Clinton thing, if y'all can remember that. A cigar is sometimes a symbol of that, and I think what's really interesting is at the end you have this really funny scene where not only is he having to deal with Haskett, who's come in and is in his study because there's no place else to go. There's a water leak or a plumbing issue or whatever. And then the next thing you know, Varric comes in, and so you have all three husbands in the room at the same time, and only Waythorn's match, light, or whatever the situation was there, is the only one that doesn't work, or the only one that works. And so basically he lights his cigar, and then the other two men use the same flame. So you have this phallic symbol of a cigar, all three kind of going into the same flame, if you get my drift on what Edith Wharton is doing there. And then of course in comes Alice, the wife, to serve tea, and she serves, if you'll notice, and again, properly, you would not serve, you would serve your husband last when you had company, and so she serves Haskett first, which was the first husband, then she serves Varric, and then she serves her own husband, Waythorn, last. And so and then you'll notice what happens there is Waythorn it laughs. And again, that really gives us our resolution. I say again and again in classes, a good author does not tell you what's going to happen. You know, one of the signs of a movie is terrible is when during the closing credits they give, you know, the future update. This person did this and this person did that. They don't do that in good movies, right? Or in good literature. We don't have to know how everything ends, but we can tell from him seeing this, he realizes, you know, he's the third to get served here. But he laughs because he realizes, you know, as he said earlier, this is something that he's going to have to be accepting of. And so we can assume as readers from his behavior here that he accepts this situation, and he has learned to live with it, and is finding the humor in it in a way. So again, great story. I really like Edith Wharton a lot, and I would suggest, you know, if you have some time over the Christmas break or over the summer, picking up The House of Mirth or Ethan Frome, which is very, very short for a novel. The House of Mirth, not so much, and giving Edith Wharton a shot at some of her other stuff, because I think after a while you'll start to pick up on the humor and other things like that. So until next time, have a good one. Loibner Waitkus.